Very good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Dipesh Sonawne, Senior Manager Medical Affairs at Lupin. On behalf of Lupin, I welcome you all to this interesting webinar on diagnostic and therapeutic procedures of the scalp. For today's webinar, I am pleased to welcome and introduce Dr. Sachin Verma, who would moderate today's session. Dr. Sachin Verma is a founder. Just a minute, I have some issue here. Yeah, Dr. Sachin Verma is a chief dermatologist and founder director at Skin Vita Clinic, Kolkata. He is also visiting consultant for Apollo Hospital, Kolkata. Dr. Sachin Verma is ex-assistant professor of dermatology at Sikkim Manipal Medical College. Dr. Verma has wide-ranging areas of interest from clinical to aesthetic dermatology, and he has contributed significantly to field of dermatology through various multiple publications in national and international journals, and also he routinely participates as an invited faculty in various national and international conferences. He also conducts various trainings and workshops for dermatologists at national and international conferences. Interestingly, he is also a columnist in Be Positive Health magazine. He is recipient of B.N. Banerjee Gold Medal Award at National Conference of IIDWELL. He is also International League of Dermatology Scholar at World Conference of Dermatology conducted at Argentina. With this introduction, I hand over the session to Dr. Sachin Verma. Over to you, sir.
So thank you so much, and thanks my friends and who are joining me today. Thanks to Lupin for giving me this opportunity, and I hope all of you are safe. I would start straight away with my presentation. And so today we'll be discussing about diagnostic and therapeutic procedures of the scalp. And, I will go to speakers and the panelists first. Let me introduce them. We have Dr. Richa Sharma from Delhi. We have Dr. Raghunath Reddy from Bangalore. We have Dr. Aseem Sharma from Mumbai, and we have Dr. Aman Dua. Coming to Dr. Richa Sharma first, she is a co-founder and medical director of Twacha Clinics. She has passed from Lady Hardinge Medical College. She is a successful practitioner. She is an entrepreneur and keen academician. She has contributed by writing multiple chapters on injectables for aesthetic dermatology and has presented in various nationals and international forums. So I welcome Dr. Richa Sharma, who will give the initial lecture on the various procedures in dermatology. This is followed by Dr. Raghunath Reddy. I think everybody knows him. He's a consultant dermatologist and founder at Root Institute of Dermatological Sciences. It's a big institute. It was inaugurated last year, I guess, by the Chief Minister. He's a dermatosurgeon at heart and innovative by mind. He's also the president of AXI. He's a teacher par excellence. I think anybody who has come in contact with him has learned something from that conference or from that workshop. He'd held 55 live workshops. He has authored various chapters, and he was in the editorial board of AXI textbook. He's held various positions at IIDWELL Karnataka, and he's the award man. He keeps getting awards. From Ellen Sinha Award to Professor Ratan Singh Sinha Award to Professor Rajendra Oreshan. And he's my very dear friend, and he's got a heart of gold. Coming to Dr. Aseem Sharma, I think he's a dermatologist who always impresses me with his very dynamic nature, and he's a chief dermatologist, Skin Saga Center of Dermatology, Mumbai. I think it's a newly opened center. I wish him all the luck. He's honorary secretary of IIDWELL Maharashtra. He's a chairperson at IIDWELL Yuva Cell with over 100 articles and chapters in this young age. What sets him apart is his army background. He's from Indian Air Force, and he's multi-talented. You name it and he does it, from photography to speaker to author to being a journalist, and he is loved by one and all. I think he's one of the most popular dermatologists in the country today. So I welcome Dr. Aseem Sharma. Wish you all the very best, Aseem, in life and your new center. And we have Aman Dua. Now she is the one we should look after because she's the go-to person in this conference. She knows everything about hair. She's contributed in hair transplant. She does her signature hair gain PRP therapies, which we should know from her. We should learn from her. She has influenced not only all the dermatologists to do hair transplant, she's influenced her husband as well, who's left ENT and joined dermatology to start the hair transplant practice. So she's a big influencer. She's on the International Board of Governors for Hair Restoration Society. So I welcome Dr. Aman Dua, who is also owning this AK clinics at Ludhiana. So if you want a hair transplant, I think you should head to Ludhiana. This is a small introduction. I think I've already been introduced. I request Dr. Richa Sharma to please start the session with her lecture. I'm stopped sharing my screen. Please do that.
Thank you, sir, for the kind introduction. And I think I'll dive right into this. I think I'm going to just rush through these slides because, you know, in the presence of such an erudite panel, I don't want to waste time, and I want to just go and right into the discussion part of this entire program. As it is, diagnostic and therapeutic procedures of the scalp is a very, very vast topic, and I'll try to cover as much as it's possible in this limited time of 15 minutes. So starting with the, just a second, starting with the diagnostic procedures. Broadly speaking, we could talk of diagnostic tools in hair as either obligate or facultative procedures. So basically, obligate procedures simply means taking a thorough history of the patient and his or her family, a good thorough clinical examination, some techniques like grading of the hair loss, trying to know how intense the problem is, doing basic tests like pull test, etc., moving on to dermoscopy also. Facultative, on the other hand, is a little bit more advanced with microscopic examination of the hair roots and the hair shafts, phototrichogram, etc. But basically, it is the task of the dermatologist to choose the right tool depending on the suspected clinical diagnosis. And as you're aware, certain tools would be best for private practice, whereas others are more sophisticated and should be used for monitoring hair growth when we are doing clinical studies. So the basic or obligate diagnostic procedures is basically a complete inspection of the scalp and the body hair distribution. And you need to know how it is distributed, whether it's diffuse, it's patterned, or it's focal. What is the area of the scalp that is most affected? Don't forget to examine the entire skin. Look out for signs of inflammation on the scalp, whether there's any scaling, erythema, or scarring. You must look with your hand lens at the follicular openings. You should look out for exclamation mark hairs or tufted hairs. You should know the density of the hair. And also, while you're at it, don't forget to look at the hair shaft quality as well. A very simple tool is the hair card test, which should be on your table while you're practicing in your OPD. It's a simple card, which is about 8 by 12 centimeter. Half of it is white, the other half is black. You place it against the scalp and you observe the hair. And some very, very simple observations can help go a long way. You may be able to identify miniaturized hairs. You may be able to also identify broken hairs because they've got blunt tips, whereas newly regrowing hairs have pointed or tapered ends. And this is very satisfying to note. If you're seeing regrowing hair, it's reassuring for the patient as well as for you, especially in non-scarring alopecia. The hair pull test is something that we all know about. It's a very simple test. You grasp 50 to 60 hair between your thumb and you gently but firmly pull it away from the hair, from the scalp. And you should not be able to pull out more than 10% of those hair. That is not more than 5 hair. And if it does turn out to be more than 5 hair, on the hair pull test, it's considered to be an indicator of ongoing hair loss and is considered a positive pull test. The tuck test is another test, which is a very valuable test when you're looking out for hair shaft disorder. So you grasp the hair between 2 hands and give a firm tug. Any hair breakage at all is a sign of hair fragility and is considered definitely abnormal. You should then proceed to mount the hair on slides and have a look on the low power, and you will be able to identify the anagen and the telogen hair. The anagen hair, as we all know, has got, they're more pigmented, they are triangular hair bulbs with presence of the inner root sheath, which appears as a white sheath. The telogen hair, on the other hand, has got a club-shaped bulb, and it has no inner root sheath. Also, it is more lightly pigmented. While you put the hair under the microscope, do not forget to look at the hair shaft, because you'll be able to tell whether there are any fractures, there's any bubbling, irregularities and twisting, so that you don't miss out disorders like monolithics, Trichorexis invaginata, Trichorexis nodosa, pilae annulata, and pilae torti. Coming on to the facultative techniques of diagnosis, I would just love to discuss all of this with the panel, but briefly speaking, we talk about facultative techniques as either non-invasive, semi-invasive, or invasive techniques. So non-invasive techniques comprise global hair counts, phototrichogram, electron microscopy. The semi-invasive ones are trichograms and unit area trichograms, whereas the invasive obviously is the scalp biopsy, especially in scarring alopecia. Let's take the example of trichogram. So after the patient has abstained from washing the hair for 5 days, about 60 to 80 hairs are plucked with a rubber-armed forceps. And then these are examined under the microscope. We basically need to look out for features of anagen, catagen, antilogen hair, as well as dysplastic and dystrophic hair. And there are very pathognomonic features of disorders that can be made out by a simple test like trichogram. For example, in alopecia areata, you will be able to see a lot of dystrophic hair and some dysplastic hair as well. Whereas in trichotillomania, you'll be able to see a lot of dysplastic hair and not many telogen hair. Coming to trichoscopy, which I believe is the cornerstone of any trichology practice, and anybody who's seeing hair loss disorders must pick up their trichoscope, their dermoscope, and evaluate the scalp of any patient. Basically, it's nothing but magnification of the scalp epidermis, and you're basically looking out for magnified images of the hair shafts, the hair follicle openings, the perifollicular epidermis, and the presence or absence or tortuosity of the blood vessels. Videodermoscopy has the advantage that you can store these findings for later, comparison as well. Just briefly going through this, I'm sure we'll all discuss this with the experts later. The normal trichoscopic findings, something like this first image over here, while you will be able to see exclamation hair marks in alopecia areata. In cases of tinea capitis, you'll be able to see comma hairs and so on. So this is a very, very useful tool. Also, dots in trichoscopy is what all of us talk about. This is an image of a normal scalp. On the other hand, when we start seeing yellow dots, it looks more like patterned hair loss. On the other hand, black dots signify alopecia areata. So this is again something that we'll come back to later during the discussion perhaps. Scalp biopsy is basically a standard tool when you want to differentiate between different types of scarring alopecia. And you can also get additional information when there are cases of unexplained non-scarring alopecia. And I particularly think it has got a great role in patterned cicatricial alopecia in females when we want to distinguish the patterned non-cicatricial alopecia, which we are learning about more and more these days. These days, the trend is to do a dermoscopy guided biopsy, because then you'll be accurately able to pinpoint the correct area for the biopsy, and therefore you will have a better or a definitive pathological diagnosis after your scalp biopsy. In non-scarring alopecia, you should be aiming to take the biopsy specimen from the center of the lesion, whereas in case of cicatricial alopecia, the active peripheral margin is the preferred location. The biopsy specimen should follow the direction of the hair growth. It should reach deep into the subcutaneous tissue where the bulbs are located. Horizontal sectioning is suitable when you have a suspected case of non-scarring alopecia, because you'll be able to visualize a larger number of hair follicles. It will be a quick overview of the hair follicle quantity, the morphometric data, how they are grouped. On the other hand, if you're suspecting scarring alopecia, a vertical sectioning will give you a better picture of the entire hair follicle histology through the whole hair shaft. Now coming to therapeutic procedures. I'll begin with low-level laser therapy, because that's the only, just give me a minute, please. Yeah, that's the only FDA-approved procedural technique in case of hair disorders. Now, basically, in this red beam or near-infrared non-thermal lasers of wavelengths between 600 to 1,000 nanometers from 5 to 500 megawatts is used, milliwatts, sorry. And this emits a monochromatic, coherent, collimated light. And because of this, the coherence keeps the energy focused and the beam narrow so that it can penetrate deeper into the areas of the scalp where the hair follicles are located. So the mechanism of action is very interesting. The chromophore for this light is cytochrome C oxidase, which is a complex of proteins in the mitochondria. And by a process called photobiomodulation, which is basically photochemical reactions that alter the biomolecules, there is an increase in ATP production. And there is an induction of transcription of proteins which are basically transcribed for basically comprise growth factors. Another mechanism is an increased blood flow at the dermal papilla. And now we have got sufficient data to support the use of LLLT. A meta-analysis of 45 articles has proved that it is more effective than minoxidil when used as a monotherapy. The ways to use it are several. We know about the Hair Max laser comb. The modality can be different. There are helmets as well. Coming to LED, now LEDs basically are light in a range of wavelengths when the beam here is incoherent and it is not collimated like LLLT, and they have a significantly lower power than most lasers, so they do not penetrate as deeply, but the photobiomodulation here has also been found to be an effective modality for treating AGA. Coming to lasers, lasers is being studied more and more these days as far as hair is concerned. Both non-ablative fractional erbium glass as well as ablative fractional erbium YAG and carbon dioxide laser have been studied. The idea is to create multiple small columns of thermal energy and accumulation of various cytokines like IGF-1, which will then promote anagen. And studies have, for instance, the study of 20 patients of male patterned hair loss who have been treated with erbium glass laser was found to be significant in causing significant improvement. There was another study with a split scalp study, which compared the combination of erbium glass with 5% minoxidil versus 5% minoxidil alone, and the combination was found to be superior. Now, the minimally invasive treatments, I'll be talking about very briefly about PRP, mesotherapy, carboxytherapy, and microneedling. PRP, we're waiting to hear from the panelists, but it is definitely a favorite of us all. And it's basically a platelet concentrate in a liquid form, which is extracted from the patient's peripheral blood, centrifuged. And then the idea is that the activated platelets, their alpha granules release growth factors, TGF-beta, EGF, VEGF, and so on. And they stimulate differentiation, proliferation, and hair follicle growth. Over the years, since we've been doing these procedures, more and more data has come out in support of PRP as an excellent modality, even when used alone for cases of all sorts of alopecia. And a recent meta-analysis compared the result of 7 RCTs, and there was enough data to support the efficacy of PRP. The problem is that there is no consensus regarding the exact concentration, whether the activator must or must not be added, what should be the dosing, what should be, in fact, even the depth of injection, what is the frequency of session. So among all these studies, it is difficult to come to a consensus about these modalities. Broadly speaking, I can tell you what I do. We take 10 cc of blood from the antecubital vein, and it is collected in a kit. And I used a ready tube for this, comprising the gel tube, which is a separator tube. The blood is centrifuged at 3000 RPM for 10 minutes, and then the trapped RBCs at the upper 2 ml of the platelet poor plasma is discarded. The rest of it is taken in syringes. After due diligence of anti-infective, antiseptic measures, we have topically anesthetized and then injected into the scalp, and the procedure is repeated after 4 weeks. So basically, it's a single spin centrifugation method. The platelet enrichment target should be about 3 to 6 times the mean concentration in the whole blood. So we are aiming at roughly 11 to 15 bags per microliter of platelets of blood. We are looking for minimizing the granulocytes, although there is a school of thought that does believe that they add to the entire efficacy. Addition of calcium chloride as an activator. I used to do it before when I was opting for the 2-spin technique, not anymore, although there is definitely data to support that it may be beneficial. My belief is that the activation occurs by the thrombin and the collagen of the dermis once you inject it. We prefer subdermal depot bolus injections because they're more efficient, less painful. They should be spaced out in the areas of thinning. I use about 3 to 4 ml per session, and my treatment protocol is at months 1, 2, 3, 6, 9, and 12 within 1 year. Now, the contraindications basically are bleeding disorders, thrombocytopenia, and also patients who are prone to keloid formation. Microneedling, again, is a very, very simple procedure, basically comprising creating little channels, micro injuries, so that it increases the skin permeability. All sorts of tools are used for microneedling, from a derma roller to a derma stamp to a derma pen. We have 12-week randomized studies involving 100 males with AGA, where it was found that the combination of this microneedling with minoxidil gave very good benefit, but the role of microneedling as monotherapy is quite limited. It is usually paired with other hair growth promoting therapies like minoxidil and PRP, of course. Yeah. So now the side effects are practically none because the microchannels close immediately, so infection is also not seen much. Now, coming to another modality of treatment called mesotherapy, which comprises intradermal infusion of a blend of components. Everything and anything, I think, goes as far as mesotherapy is concerned, but minoxidil, people inject finasteride, dutasteride, and cocktails containing growth factors, panthenol, biotin, and even steroids. Some studies have shown good results both in male and female patterned hair loss, but there is lack of standardization regarding how and what exactly are the mesotherapy agents or mesosolutions that should be used. What is very pertinent to note is that mesotherapy does have many side effects. Cutaneous infections caused by non-tuberculous mycobacteria have been reported. Multifocal scalp abscesses with subcutaneous fat necrosis and scarring alopecia has been caused by mesotherapy. There is also a recent report of frontal edema due to the 5% minoxidil solution used in mesotherapy. Carboxytherapy is not something that I do, but it's interesting to note that it comprises insufflation of medical grade carbon dioxide, which increases blood flow in that area. The clinical evidence is still weak, although a 2018 study of 40 patients of male patterned baldness and 40 of alopecia areata showed good improvement with carboxytherapy. What is very exciting is these novel approaches for delivery of topical medications. We've talked about lasers, ablative and non-ablative laser devices, but other than that, professional tattoo machines for delivering these products into the scalp, radiofrequency, sonophoresis, iontophoresis, and a combination of one or two of these is a very promising way to deliver the products deep inside where the bulb is. Scalp micropigmentation is simply medical tattooing for camouflaging, and it can be used as an adjunct to hair transplant. It is done under local anesthesia and can take a long time if you're going to micropigment the whole area, and the dye insertion is repeated 2 to 3 times. The drawbacks is pigment bleeding and graying of the surrounding hair, and very rarely infection. Stem cell therapy is a new and promising area of research. Human umbilical cord blood derived mesenchymal stem cells as well as hair follicle stem cells show a lot of promise, and we can look forward to starting these therapies in the near future. The last part of the hair transplant, I think I should just stop here and hand over to the panelists who are really experts at these procedures. Broadly speaking, they will be comparing FUE and FUT. And let's hear more from them. So thank you. Over to you, Dr. Sachin. Thank you.
Yes, just stop sharing, please. Yes. So I think that was an elaborate and complete presentation, as well you can do in 15 minutes. I think you almost covered everything and made us almost redundant, but let's start and try doing something which can help the process more. So let us see where we are and what has to be done. So I think let me share my screen, please. Just a minute. Is mine. I think this one is okay. This one is... So we have all seen this various diagnostic procedures. I will start from the first one, hair pull test. I think how many of us actually do hair pull test and in which conditions? Do you do to every patient who comes for the hair loss? Do you pull his hair? I mean, are they comfortable doing it, or what is basically it is actually done for, Raghu?
Yeah, generally we used to do it, but sometimes it just gives us a clue when a patient comes and tells us that I'm losing excessive hair. We have a doubt. It may be normal. Nowadays, there are a lot of people with panic that even though they are losing minimal normal hair, less than 50, 60, it depends on how they perceive. Now, if I have seen patients whom I'm not able to convince that it is normal, then we have to do something. And this is one thing which you can easily do it without much pain, with not being very this thing, and we get an idea. As Dr. Richa explained, if you are holding around 40 to 60 hairs, and if you are able to extract more than 5, there may be a clue that may be silently occurring either telogen effluvium or anagen effluvium or something like that. So something like that. Otherwise, it's not much very valuable diagnostic tool. If you think that you need to do something for the patient to
Yeah, Aman, you would like to add something? You were saying something, Aman. You raised your hand.
I do it in all the patients, unless there is trichodynia. I mean, some patients just complain of pain in the hair roots as a history. So in those cases, I don't, but in almost all the cases, I pull the hair.
So it's done more for telogen effluvium, that the hair comes out easily, than anagen effluvium, isn't it?
Or to ruling out androgenetic alopecia along with telogen effluvium. So I like to have a look at the hair roots, the clubs that come out, and what kind of, whether it is just shaft breakage or is it coming exactly from the roots. The kind of hair that come out, I do that.
Asim, do you do trichogram? And I mean, how do you do a trichogram? And if at all you do it, and how many of us actually do a trichogram?
So trichograms again are very, very useful when you want to differentiate between anagen hair and telogen hair. So I do trichograms, not very regularly, and especially not in practice, but when I was in a government setup, yes, it's a very, very important test, because a lot of patients come to us with undiagnosed hair fall and they want to know if it's anagen effluvium or telogen effluvium, especially when referred. So I think that is where a trichogram does have a good role to play. It's as simple as a hair pull test, only it's done with a hemostat. So I think it's once you know how to do it, it takes just about 10 to 12 minutes to do it. Okay. And just to add to the hair pull test, if I may, if I can add a point.
Right.
Especially in women with female pattern hair loss, a lot of times we have concomitant telogen effluvium or telogen effluvium which may get activated by, female pattern hair loss which may get activated by telogen effluvium. So all cases of female hair loss, especially the ones with thinning, I almost always do a hair pull test.
So you mean to say that that a hair pull test is probably more significant in a female than a male?
Yes, in my opinion, yes.
Right. I think.
But for the difficulty, trichogram will score over hair pull test because it gives more information, more evidence-based scientific information.
But when you are plucking 40 to 60 hair of a female or a male, aren't they very upset about it? Like literally pulling it out, they feel that you have taken away 60 hair and they feel it is lost. How do you handle that?
Sir, I usually take photographs of the hair. So, for example, if somebody has been referred for a drug-induced anagen effluvium, I show them the roots. I take photographs of that, a photomicrographic image. And once you show it to them, patients are very much on board. Then they refer more patients for the same test, because then it becomes kind of a fad for them. That undiagnosed hair loss, okay, he'll do a test and he'll tell you some information about the hair roots.
Very nice. I think that is an interesting point. So,
Richa wants to say something.
Yes, Richa.
Sir, it is interesting to note that a lot of patients of mine perform the pull test themselves. So when they are
to convince us,
just to show, that they look at this hair, it's just coming out. So it's kind of reassuring for them that we are on the same page. If I'm also able to, demonstrate after the hair pull.
So do you do hair pull tests commonly, or do you do trichogram? Because I believe in practice, trichogram is not very commonly done on day-to-day basis. This is what I practice trichogram rarely now in private practice. It becomes difficult.
Trichoscopy is better.
So back in the day, I used to have a Castlight Nova for the photo trichogram, but that was actually also very difficult to kind of manage and everything. So we left doing that as well. So.
I agree, Sachin, it's difficult, but when you really have a doubt in some tricky cases to differentiate between AG and chronic telogen effluvium and all, that scores over other things to be really analyzing whether it is anagen or telogen or there are any vellus hairs or something like that. But I agree, it is tedious and difficult to routinely perform. That's why most of us now don't do it.
So for the dermatologists who are attending this webinar, as Dr. Aseem Sharma said, after taking the hair, you have to do a phototrichogram and show them the differentiation between anagen, catagen, and telogen here. And this slide actually shows them an anagen hair is completely surrounded by scale from top to bottom, the root portion, whereas catagen is only in the lower portion, and in a telogen hair, you have only the bulb which is surrounded by a scale. So this is how you differentiate. This I think all of us know, but I think Dr. Richa can throw some light here as to what is a normal scenario and how the scenario changes in terms of trichogram. Dr. Richa, can you just say something about this?
Yes.
How you read a trichogram?
Yeah. Normally speaking, fewer hair will be less than 90% hair will be in case in telogen. So in case of telogen effluvium, we will markedly see telogen hair, which is roughly more than definitely more than 30% hair. In case of androgenetic alopecia, you will see more vellus hair as compared to terminal hair. So vellus or miniaturization of hair will be observed more in case of androgenetic alopecia, and you will be able to see dysplastic and dystrophic hair in cases of alopecia areata.
Yeah, so
androgenetic alopecia, the vellus hair may not be more than the terminal hair, but significantly higher.
Right, true. So here what we understand is that the only differentiation between telogen effluvium and chronic telogen effluvium is in both the telogen hair is increased. But in chronic telogen effluvium, the hair shedding would not be as high as a acute telogen effluvium. So that the amount of shear, the amount of hair loss, and the amount of differentiation and the other history that the patient gives would probably help us differentiate between telogen effluvium and chronic telogen effluvium. Has anybody seen anagen effluvium with Dr. Aseem? Have you seen anagen effluvium?
Sir, it's actually yes, it's actually very common with a drug we give for vitiligo, azathioprine. It's been reported many times in literature. We see it, I won't say very often, but definitely once in 6 months you could come across a case of anagen effluvium where you have to diagnose that based on maybe you have to take a trichogram for a medical legal purposes as well, because many times these patients will have normal TPMT levels and they can still have azathioprine induced effluvium.
Not only azathioprine, many drugs can cause that, and unpredictably. I had a patient who started telling me I'm losing too much of hair. I did not initially believe, and when I analyzed properly, she had taken only azithromycin, and definitely there was a sudden and aggressive shedding of hair. So there are many drugs which can cause that, but it may vary from person to person.
Yeah, so anagen effluvium is mostly drug induced. I think various anti-cancer drugs and anti-malignant, anti-metabolites, very common. So we must keep a track of that. Sometimes patients may not agree to pulling of the hair as in trichogram. Any visual test to diagnose it? So there are two visual tests. Anybody, Dr. Aman, can you put some light on this hair growth window and phototrichogram, please?
Sir, I think these are most for research purposes, the hair growth window. I mean, again, you have to shave the hair and then watch this hair over time, how much is the growth, and the diameter changes accordingly. But again, I think this is more like of research value, or when we are doing studies and we want to note down how much the patients are responding to a certain therapy, and because both of these require trimming. So in our clinic, we are doing trichoscopy. I'm using Caslight, and we are doing it in all the patients, and we're projecting onto a screen and showing to our patients. So
if you want to do something like this, global photography, digital photography is better.
Yes. Aseem, you would like to add some point, or Dr.
Same, sir. I agree. This is more research oriented, more when we are doing research studies or clinical trials where it's a mandate to do unit area trichograms or hair growth window tests. But otherwise, if anybody has the photo finder, the TrichoScan also does something similar. But again, that point which Dr. Aman mentioned of trimming the scalp, a lot of patients do not want us to trim a 1 by 1 centimeter area, so it becomes a little. It's not very relevant in clinical practice, I would say.
Correct. Sometime it may be needed if patient is trying to say that his hair never grows, and so you might just shave it off. The other way of actually doing a hair growth window is people who actually dye their hair. So you ask them to dye it, and you can actually call them after a week, and the 1 to 2 millimeter that has grown down, you can show that white hair, and you can show them that, see, your hair is grown. So it is other way of checking a hair growth window test where the white hair appears. I think this may be significant. Trichoscopy, I think it was lovely, very well covered. It's basically a dermoscope through which we see. How many of us do trichoscopy? Everybody does trichoscopy? Dr.
Yes.
Richa, Dr. Raghu?
Yeah, it's become a very essential tool nowadays, especially when you are routinely seeing to differentiate between AGA and chronic telogen effluvium. It immediately gives you a clue depending upon the number of vellus hair you have and other parameters. Definitely, it's a very, very useful tool and more accurate than other things to differentiate.
Asim, you would like to add something there?
Same, sir. In fact, I don't see hair patients without a trichoscope. All patients that I see who have come for a hair, whether hair loss or hair fall, I do examine them with a trichoscope, because all the tests that we spoke about initially, if a simple trichoscopy can also give us clues which might not require, which might alleviate the need for a biopsy also, at least in non-cicatricial alopecia. So I do find trichoscopy very, very important nowadays.
So Aman, you would like to say something, because I have seen that you actually not only do trichoscopy, you show to the patient on the screen.
Yes,
Does the
sir.
patient is anyway convinced?
A lot. And they're more convinced that we are authentic trichologists, I mean, it kind of puts a stamp on it. We also give a printed report. We also give them a printed report as to what is their diameter, what is the thickness, the density in different areas, from the back to the vertex to the frontal, the temporal areas. And we also repeat it, before every PRP that I do. So the baseline and before every procedure of PRP, so that they also can kind of see, although there can be some confounding errors also in interpersonal errors when you're doing such tests, but still, it kind of confirms that we're doing the right thing and more stuff.
I think it is one test which is not only scientific but a good marketing agent for your clinic as well.
Dr. Richa wanted to add something.
Yes, sir. I wanted to add that I think it has got a great role in trichotillomania, and in differentiating between trichotillomania and alopecia areata. Also in female pattern hair loss and chronic telogen effluvium. As we know, chronic telogen effluvium is basically a diagnosis of exclusion as far as trichoscopy is concerned. So if you can prove to the patient, that can also become very reassuring. And I'm very inspired by Dr. Aman to restart my Caslight system now, I think.
Yeah.
Actually, if you have a focused practice like Aman, you have more refined and more complete approach, wherein you can do more focused and more appropriate work. What we do, we try to do everything, and you will not find time to do many things. So focused practice will be more, very oriented and focused.
Sir, having said that, I think now with increased PRP and increased hair practice, I'm seeing that at least 10% of my patient practice is actually hair. They would say that I'm losing hair and, I'm some form of hair. Even though they have come for dermatology, they do add, as hair as one of the adjuvant, treatment. So a trichoscopy adds a little.
It is around 20%.
20%, maybe even more in some people. So just to, brief our audience who are actually seeing this, how do you read a trichoscopy? I'll just go briefly through it. So when you're doing a trichoscopy, you have to look for three areas. One is the follicular area, how the follicle is. Then is the perifollicular area. And then is the interfollicular area. So these are the three things that you have to see. In interfollicular area, you have vascular areas and pigmentation. Normally, the interfollicular area looks like honeycombed. The follicular area is what you should concentrate on, because this is going to describe how the follicle is, and it's usually filled with hair. And you have to see what is, in case it's coming, the hair is coming out, you have to see what is the type of hair. Is it a terminal hair or a vellus hair? And any hair more than 20% of being a vellus hair puts under AGA. But what you also see is various dots, and I would go into various dots. I think we have 4 panelists, we can ask them. So yellow dot is nothing but an empty hair follicle. So Dr. Richa will actually tell about yellow dots. Do you see yellow dots, and what do you make out of it?
Yes, yellow dots is basically the infundibulum filled with keratinous or sebaceous material, and it is pathognomonic basically of pattern hair loss, male pattern hair loss, but it is also seen in cases of alopecia areata.
Right. And Dr. Aman, what about white dots? Do you see it, and how do you relate it?
So it just signifies fibrosis. So if there is cicatricial alopecia, folliculitis decalvans, LPP, so you find those white dots on the scalp surface and also empty follicles around, that signifies cicatrix.
That will be more useful in a condition called frontal fibrosing alopecia, which is really confusing and difficult.
Right, right.
They're more bald in
Other-
FFA. They're more bald in FFA, like empty.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah. Because in these conditions, LPP and all, we get some clinical clues. But in frontal fibrosing alopecia, it's really confusing. It almost looks like, androgenetic alopecia, male pattern alopecia in a female. So it looks like that. So it will be helpful.
Raghu, can you emphasize on black dots, please, for the audience as to when do we see a black dot and what does it signify?
Yeah, as you rightly said, it is seen in alopecia areata classically, where some hairs are trying to pop out from the follicles. It can be seen in tinea, where the hair is broken at the level of the scalp, either due to fungus invading either extra or intra hair. And trichotillomania mania, you will have all types of other findings also, like broken hairs, different levels of hairs, different diameter, and also you will get even areas where there is fibrosis, areas where there is red dots, representing even some amount of trauma. So you will get a complex of everything in trichotillomania. And if you see black dots, and if you have a difference, the real doubt between alopecia areata and tinea capitis, you should further proceed to take hairs and mount it and look for the spores or the hyphae.
Right.
OH mount will be
Anything about
necessary.
red dots, please? Do you see red dots commonly, or it's not very common?
No, it's in trichotillomania. There will be areas of trauma with even little bit of microhemorrhage, which can be whiter.
Right. Just to mention, sir, in cases of trichotillomania, the hemorrhage is not so much around the hair; it is interfollicular. So the hemorrhage is more in interfollicular. But Dr. Asim, you would like to say something about red dots, please?
Yes, and just to complete what Raghu sir was also saying, interfollicular hemorrhage, especially I had a discussion with a psychiatrist. A very interesting point they mentioned, since it's an overlap between an impulse control disorder and an obsessive compulsive disorder. So these patients are very clean. So often when they come to you, you will not be able to see interfollicular hemorrhages as such. It's very rare to be seen. But overall, if you look at red dots, like you've rightly mentioned on the slide, it's a classical marker of DLE. It represents dilated vasculature, but it's also very commonly seen in scalp psoriasis. Even as something as simple as seborrheic dermatitis can give you arborizing loops, which you have to differentiate from DLE. But these are few conditions where you see red dots.
In terms of follicular areas, guys, you have to first see the follicular, whether it's filled with hair, and then see from the follicle what kind of dots are actually coming out, and that can help you. Next come the perifollicular.
Actually, another condition, you have made it. We will come to it later. Okay, go ahead.
I think perifollicular, once you have seen the hair follicle, how it is coming out, then in a trichoscopy, you should look for perifollicular. Actually, these slides are one which how I do it. So it may be different than what other people do it, but how I read a trichoscopy is first I see the follicle, because that is my primary concern. Then I see the perifollicular area as to how the perifollicular area is, whether it's inflamed, not inflamed, and we see various features. And I think Aman can explain about the perifollicular areas because she does a lot of trichoscopies. Aman, can you mention about the perifollicular areas, please?
So, sir, especially perifollicular scaling, a lot of patients with seborrheic dermatitis, and when we show the patient that, okay, you see so much of scaling, and they're like, oh my God, I never knew I have such a dirty scalp. So, I mean, you have to sometimes demonstrate that this perifollicular, scales are there, but they can be confusing as to scales in seborrheic dermatitis or the scales like tubular scales of the casts, what we call. So they could be some confusion for us. And then we have to look around for other signs like dots and, the kind of hair that we have. Pustules are very easy to recognize. At times we also see nits in the perifollicular area where patients have lice on the scalp. So sometimes not exactly lice, you are able to see nets. And again, you have to distinguish it, what we are looking at, the casts or those nets. And the color, definitely the blue-gray, the dots that you've mentioned over here, and obviously the halo, because telogen effluvium is a diagnosis of exclusion in trichoscopy. So
Right.
you don't really get so many signs that you see, and the perifollicular halo could be subtle sign of that.
Actually, clinically, if you ask me, one of the commonest condition is scalp psoriasis. But I really had situations where I had difficulty in differentiating mild scalp psoriasis with severe seborrheic dermatitis, or when semi-treated. So this is a situation where your trichoscopy will be very useful, because it is easy to pick psoriasis because of arborizing and branching and dilating blood vessels. One of the commonest and easily diagnosable condition is psoriasis with trichoscopy, and it has been very useful for me to differentiate when I have that doubt.
So once we have done the follicle and the perifollicular area, then you should see the interfollicular area, because that tells us the condition of the scalp, whether there is inflammation, whether there is pigmentation, whether there is vascular problem, because this is the area where the hair is either lost or going to be lost. So it shows the condition of the scalp. How much is the nutrition? What is the level? What is the underlying? Whether it's thinned out or not. So, Dr. Richa, can you just say something about the interfollicular areas? What kind of pigment do you see? What kind of rashes do you see, or what kind of trichoscopic findings do you see in the interfollicular spaces?
Yes, sir. So in chronic cases of androgenetic alopecia, we see peripilar pigmentation, or because of the sun exposure on the bald areas of
Right.
the
That's
male.
very important. Yes.
Yes, and also in cases of DLE, we may be seeing darkening of the peripilar area. So I'm sorry to just before I miss it, have we talked about the hair diameter diversity? Because that was one thing that we should be looking at, just as we start with the trichoscopy.
It was just mentioned somewhere in the slides.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when we have the hair, the first thing that you see in the follicle is the terminal to the vellus hair ratio and the diameter. That is the first thing to see in the follicle.
Somewhere it was mentioned more than 20% of vellus hair is indicative of aging.
And isotrichosis.
Right.
That is.
Yes.
And as you've mentioned in your slide, thinned out shiny skin, which is seen in pseudopelade, is also. I have not
also see for vasculature, as Dr. Asim was saying, and Dr. Asim can finish it off, and then we can go to the next topic about other than trichoscopy. So Dr. Asim, you were mentioning this about the loops. Can you mention the interfollicular way? So in the vasculature should be seen in the interfollicular area. Right.
Absolutely. So you can either have red dots over there, like we discussed in previous slides, or you can have loops, which could be simple red loops, which are just like it's just like a small arc. Or you can have a proper branching network, which is called an arborizing network. So a simple red loop could be seen in something as simple as seborrheic dermatitis or cellulitis or other scalp infections. Red dots we've discussed, psoriasis, sebderm, and DLE. Twisted red loops with an arborizing network are almost always seen in DLE, especially the branching network. And absent loops obviously indicate epidermal atrophy, possibly secondary to a cicatricial alopecia. So that is where we should probably have a high index of suspicion.
Right. This is the various features we all know about it. So there is, as Dr. Raghu was saying, usually you have to see for combinations. Once you have seen what I do in my clinic is whatever finding I write in a paper. Suppose I have a follicular finding, I write down the follicular finding, then I write the, your perifollicular finding and the intervening finding interfollicular, and that I combine mentally to see what kind of diagnosis I am looking at. So I write all the 3 points on the paper, and this is also written in the prescription of the patient, what I have seen in trichoscopy, both in terms of follicular and perifollicular and interfollicular findings. Once I have the 3-4 finding, it helps me with the diagnosis. I think all of us probably are doing it. So hair shaft disorders, I think anybody interested in hair shaft disorders, does anybody follow it? I think this is the various hair shaft disorders. So I think anybody can take this and probably just explain it.
I had a case of, two siblings having, silvery hair, and investigated. One turned out to be Gricilis, other one turned out to be Chidiaki gashi. Person Chidiaki gashi died, and I have reported it. And
Very good.
And it was an interesting study, because in one of them there was a large, giant melanosomes in the shaft, In other condition, the melodomes were very small and rudimentary. That is one test which you can immediately do, and it is diagnostic. So
Yes.
very easy to identify, especially when you have a doubt.
How many, I mean, this is more for theoretical. How many, Asim, do you do a trichoscopy of the hair and then see the hair shaft, whether there are knots and whether there are pilae?
Not usually, no.
Not usually, right.
But like you said, as the initial part of a trichoscopic examination, you always focus on the hair shaft,
Right.
which is emerging from the follicular root. Maybe there it is simpler to pick up. Out of these, only I think monolithics is the commonest out of these conditions which are mentioned here. The others maybe not. A lot of trichorexis nodosa is now we are seeing in patients who have treated hair, who have chemically or mechanically treated hair, or hair which have been straightened. People who repeatedly get Brazilian wax treatments done and keratin treatments done, blowout treatments done. So a lot of there you do see splayed ends. Again, it's not related to a genotrichosis as such, but that's something to watch out for.
So does the hair shaft, Aman, actually hair shaft disorders help us in our treatment in any manner? I mean, does it change our treatment?
Actually, one point to add, definitely the monolithics and trichorexis nodosa can be confusing. They look alike clinically when we see. We had a case where there are multiple patches of localized. It was looking like, trichorexis nodosa, but I was of the opinion that it looks more like monolithics because it is focal, patch here and there. And so Savita was saying, no sir, it is reported that it is trichorexis nodosa, not monolithics. And we cut the hair, we examined at microscopy also, and it was that can present as the localized, trichorexis nodosa, localized patches. So definitely in some cases when it is needed, we'll have to do it.
Right. Aman, you were saying something?
Yes, we also have microscopes in the OT. We have Mantis microscope. So if sometimes I just pluck the hair or cut the hair shaft and see it under microscope, I'm sure we are able to see more of those hair shaft disorders under that. It's a projection microscope. Sometimes you can even ask the patient to see, okay, these are the beads. The pseudomonolithics is very common. The breakage of the hair treatments. Yeah, that is more.
Hello?
Yeah, go ahead.
Management, if we have one of these diagnoses?
I was about to add that we are so focused on the roots in private practice that we forget to look at the hair shaft completely. So as Dr. Asim rightly pointed out, because of hair treatments that people are getting done, we can see a few of these changes during the trichoscopy. But other than that, I really am guilty of not focusing on hair shaft at all, actually.
Yes, Ravi.
The chronic telogenous phlegm is very common with hair treatments like straightening, and that continues should shed for a very long time. Will any sign help in examining in that condition, Dr. Aman or Richa or Asim? It will be a persistent, prolonged chronic telogenous effluvium with associated with especially that straightening. Do you get any clue if you examine the hair shaft?
So you get bubble hair, sir. That is what they say.
Yeah.
So bubble hair is actually, hair filled with air or damaged hair where the cortex is lost, and therefore it actually easily breaks. So if you see under microscope, you will see irregular, irregular cortex. Asim, you would like to add something? How much do you see, in Bombay, a lot of people, industry people, they actually come with hair treatments. Do you see the hair loss is more with those people?
We do see a lot of effluvium in these patients who come in, as Raghu rightly pointed out. Again, bubbles as such I have not noticed, to be honest with you. I've seen them when I was in Sion because we had a special case referred to us. But otherwise, it's not as common as projected. But otherwise, a slight weathering of the hair shaft can be noticed. You can notice, things like trichoptelosis or multiple split ends. You can notice these few signs in patients who get multiple treatments done. But it's more of a clinical correlation. I would not be able to diagnose something only on trichoscopy in these particular patients.
Also, sir, sometimes just clinically, when you look at the patient, there's a wavy hair on the top and a straight doll hair down. So you're able to see that, okay, she got some treatments done and it's quite visible. Yeah.
Yeah, these are again important. The hair fold sign, more for theoretical purpose. You can see the amount. I just to rush it up, whether how many folds are coming up, and if it is positive, that means you are developing a reduction in hair follicle. And this is something which is, I think, again, it's more for theoretical purposes. But you have to pull the hair, keep the root constant and pull the hair apart to see if the hair breaks easily. So the root should not be pulled. The shaft should be pulled to see if the shaft has become weak or damaged. And this is more done for the shaft disorders, what we read. So after the chemical treatment, we can keep, through one hand, keep the finger constant on the root and then just pull the shaft to see if it works. So friends, the hair forge test, anybody does it? I personally, I think this is more for theoretical reasons. And does anybody does hair wash test and ask the patient to come back with the hair? I have seen people coming back with.
I asked them to do 60-second, and a modified version of that 60-second is 90-second. I little bit variation, because 60-second, what happens is this is not something practicable, but 60-second hair comb test is more practicable and it can be practiced easily. Right. But I do, because in 60 seconds they advise only starting from the vertex from the back only to the front and sides, but I make it 90 seconds and I'll also ask them to comb backwards on the occipital area to be more. So it takes 90 seconds. I ask them to put a white towel on the table, bend your head, take a medium sized comb, and before bath. So you comb it continuously in all directions, starting from the vertex, back, front, sides, and collect the hair, and they will laugh at me, oh, is it possible to count? I said it only takes 10 minutes to count the hair. And definitely you will be involving them, and it can be reassuring if the number, we can play with them, like, so you can tell them, no, it is not that significant.
Right. Has anybody have a patient who comes with a bag full of your plastic full of hair?
All the time.
All the time.
So many hair, and they say, my God. And you are like, you don't know, and they're dirty hair, they'll come and show you and they keep on your table.
Yeah.
I'm showing, see, I've lost so much hair in the last 1 month, all collected from, so I mean, is that significant? I mean, can that help in any manner or to reassure?
So usually what they do is they collect hair on the day of shampooing. They do everything that we ask them not to do when we ask them to collect hair. We also ask patients to get a daily hair count done. But in a few of these situations, even I have done that 60-second combing test, because if patients come to you telling you that they're losing more than 400 hair per day, which is scientific, people do lose that. I'm not saying it's not possible, but it's very rare. Then you make them comb their hair and you'll see only about 30 to 40 hair coming out. Yes. So you can reassure patients that no, you're wrong. You were not, you didn't collect it in the right manner. So that is another sort of a practice tip for 60-second comb test.
The problem with 60-second comb test is that there is a contribution of hair breakage also. So it may not give you an accurate picture. But if you were to account for the hair breakage happening every time we do the 60-second hairbrush test, then probably it's a valid test.
Right. I think that's a valid point. One test may not be enough. You have to kind of repeat it 3-4 times to have a valid results. So that gives you a true picture. Aman, do you do Woods lamp? Since you do, you don't. Anybody doing wood lamps on hair, and any condition that they do it?
Only in government colleges for TNM and hepatitis.
PGs. Yeah.
But again, with the use of a trichoscope, this is redundant now. There is nothing extra.
Sometimes for scalp,
especially with the decrease in the tinea involving the hair shaft.
Right.
Losing. Nowadays, what we get at the most is, some cases of Kirian.
Right. Yeah. So it is not routinely done, except in cases of, I do it in scalp vitiligo at times where the hair is still black and patient complains with a family history of vitiligo. They are very paranoid and they come to you that my child is getting vitiligo on the scalp. And so you occasionally do it, though there are various conditions which are mentioned. You might get a false negative reports as well. So you must keep a track of that. But sometimes various deodorants can look like, scalp deodorants and other makeup can look like fungal infection. So you should discount that. But it may be beneficial, as Dr. Raghu said, in cases of Kirian and tinea capitis and things like that. But not routinely done except for vitiligo in my case. Scalp biopsy, I think she's already covered it. Horizontal versus vertical. Any other conditions other than hair loss where a scalp biopsy you do other than the hair? I mean, how many of you do biopsies for diagnosing the reason of hair loss, except for cicatricial? Leave apart cicatricial.
LPP is very common. DLE is not that rare. You will
Right.
patches only in the scalp, and
Right.
so many other conditions where you have a doubt, you will have to do it. Especially, for example, now you have a diffuse alopecia areata, which can be really confusing with many conditions. And this is quite common. Diffuse alopecia areata, not following the pattern of patchy hair loss. It has to be done, and it's very important, and it is very and this is definitive, one of the most definitive diagnostic tool compared to many other things which we discussed.
So what about frontal fibrosing alopecia? Anybody finds any features in frontal fibrosing alopecia which they help them differentiate, or a biopsy, they do it, things like that? I mean,
Yeah, it has to be a clinico-pathological correlation in that condition, where you have this clinical condition only in the front, you get that shiny loss of hair. But what happens, no, when you do a biopsy, in addition to fibrosing features, you will have atrophy of the skin, but hyperkeratosis. This is a slight, thinned, shiny, glistening atrophy, but hyperkeratosis will be there. So that gives the clue in addition to fibrosed follicles.
right.
Also,
Right.
clinical signs of loss of eyebrows and those small follicular prominences onto the scalp.
So the last in the investigative thing, then we'll go to therapeutic. Scraping, anybody does it or not done anymore? Still done in government sectors in some places
Yeah.
for diagnosing tinea, or no? Wound
Like-
swab occasionally. Yes.
Like I said, sir, even tinea capitis now has very characteristic features on trichoscopy. So the need for doing any scraping or wood lamp in tinea capitis is gone, in my opinion. That's my personal opinion.
Sometime I do scraping on a slide to see a nit or a lice when I'm very not sure. So I take it on the slide and then see it with a dermoscope, because on the scalp when it is there, it is not very clear. So sometime I do take this, scales on the, when I suspect the itching is out of proportion to what the patient is complaining. So I do take with a small blade on the scales on the slide and do see under dermoscope, not for scraping, for staining, but to see under dermoscope whether I'm missing out any nits or things like that. But besides that, as Asim said, we hardly do this test right now. Coming to therapeutic interventions, and now I'm leaving completely to the audience. The commonest is intralesional steroid injections as an intervention. So do you do it for all cases of alopecia areata and any other indications that you do intralesional steroids?
In my case, if I have one or two patches which are sized, not in a child, so in adults I go for interlesional. If I see more number of patches, if I see the disease is progressing very fast, aggressive, my best way of managing them is for pulse steroid therapy and topical applications of combinations, like you can give calcineurin inhibitors with even minoxidil with tretinoin. So this works. So when I see multiple patches aggressive, then I don't go for intralesional, because it will be difficult to cover all the patches, painful and difficult. So I'll shift to systemic therapy. Otherwise, in a localized or one or two patches, except in young children, it's very, very common and routinely done, and the staple treatment therapeutic approach.
So Dr. Richa, do you give intralesional steroid for any other indication other than alopecia areata?
Well, not really. No, if I'm seeing some kind of activity in a case of lichen planopilaris, then I might give some intralesional steroid. But then there is always a risk of increasing atrophy. So I'm a little cautious about intralesional steroids. So most of the patients that I do it is for alopecia areata.
Dr. Aman, Dr. Asim, would like to contribute anything more? Any conditions where you would like to give intralesional steroids?
Same with lichen planopilaris. If I'm able to see blue-gray ovoid dots, which is a sign of lichenoid infiltration, that is the perfect time to give intralesional steroids. So in those cases, but again, if there are more than two patches, and mostly these patients would be seen by somebody else before us, so then that frequency.
Even in an active case of DLE, but what you should do in these conditions is you should always give 5 milligram diluted to 5 milligram per ml, because I have seen even 10 milligrams can lead to little bit of lipodystrophy and depressed patch. So
Yes,
our 10 milligrams, even now for alopecia areata, after seeing this recently depressed patch, I go for 5 milligram per ml.
Aman, you were saying something, please?
Some inflammatory folliculitis, sometimes bigger cysts. At times, I feel like giving some
Right.
form
I
of
think
steroid,
she's
like
on
in,
the scalp. Yes.
yeah.
What about
If you ask me, says Sachin, I had given to 2 or 3 patients who had very thick lichenified the LSC is very common and the back is many times it is very thick lichenified, they can't avoid, topical application itself will not be able to reduce, and I have given intralesional steroid. So LSC is not uncommon on the occipital region, particularly in the nuchal region.
what about acne keloidal nucleus?
Acne keloidalis nucleus, yes. Now slowly you are coming to remind us.
Right. No, what I want to understand is, do you give intralesional steroids on the eyebrows if the patient is
Yes, I give very commonly and it gives very good results.
diluted or 10 milligrams?
Alopecia areata.
I diluted to 2.5 milligrams. One is to
5 I have not found difficulty or any problem with 5 also.
Okay, interesting.
In fact, on the beard, 10 milligrams tolerate much better compared to the scalp. You don't get atrophy or anything on the beard, whereas it is more common on the scalp.
Right. I think interesting. So we have to dilute it, guys. If you are giving around the eyebrows and in areas where you have extensive lesions, so this should be understood, and never give 40 milligram intralesional tricot on the scalp. Coming to surgeries, I think this is the forte of Raghu and Dr. Richa, no, Dr. Aman. You would, any surgeries other than hair transplant, do you perform at your center, Aman, other than hair transplant?
Yes, yes, excisions, nevus judicens, and those kind of things, like simple excisions, sebaceous cysts, INDs. I mean, simpler things. I'm not a plastic surgeon that way, but then I tend to do what I can do the best. That's
So Raghu is the
See,
dermatologist.
we do very commonly because tracheal lemmal cyst is very, very common and easiest to do. And then you get sebaceous cyst, you get dermoid cyst, you get even lipomas. Sometimes, clinically on the scalp, it is little more difficult to differentiate compared to other sites. And, so what you do, simple tips are, one is that you will have to trim the area where you are doing, except in tricholemmal cyst, which is easy. The moment you incise, it pops up. But if you are going for a sebaceous cyst or a lipoma or a dermoid cyst, it is better to shave that area. And second thing is, after good proper infiltration, wait for more than 10 to 15 minutes for the hemostasis to occur. And then the third thing is that you always use Vicryl, not the black color suture material, which is what is that? Sorry, mental block.
Silk or Prolene is blue in color. Vicryl
Yeah,
is
Prolene, always Prolene, because it's so difficult to use 30 or 30 ethylone, which typically looks like hair. It will be difficult while suturing as well as even for removing. So it's better always use Vicryl.
right. So Aman, do you do FUT or FUEs?
both. Matlab, we started with FUTs, then we moved around to FUE because FUTs were then very vogue. And we learned FUE and brought FUE to India in 2007. And since then we are doing FUEs, but in mega sessions where we have to combine the lot of area, at times I do combine FUT with FUE. But these days with advance of body hair, sometimes we don't need to do FUT. You just go on to beard and chest and even pubic hair. So these are taken.
In FUTs, what kind of
Dr. Raman, nowadays how difficult it is to even convince patients also for FUT, because they have
the fad has become so much for FUE that FUT is kind of becoming obsolete now. Although there are certain only FUT surgeons, and I've had debates on the podium so many times, FUT versus FUE. But the reality is that yes, even the patients are moving away from FUT quite a bit, scare of invasive surgery and all that. Yeah.
Right. So I think this is important. Electrosurgeries, radiofrequency surgeries, we have all common. I think pyogenic granulomas. Any post-care advice? How do you clean that area? How do you dress it? Dr. Raghu, how do you dress an area once you have done the scalp surgery?
See, in warts, seborrheic keratosis, all these things, it is not necessary to dress. You have removed the lesion, it is not bleeding, and if you feel that you have done larger lesions or deeper, you can add a course of antibiotic And topical applications, I prefer giving a lotion. You will get clindamycin lotion instead of giving cream. For any condition, you ask them to apply a cream, they continue to apply without washing, and it aggregates there and it will become dirty, messy, and it again acts as a nidus of infection. So it's better to give a lotion. Clindamycin is available as a lotion. If you want to use antibiotic topically, you can do that. So there are a lot of these things I do, especially for actinic keratosis. If you feel large plaques, actinic keratosis, or even seborrheic keratosis is more common, I do cryotherapy, just not very aggressive, simple, around just 2 rounds of 10 seconds or 15 seconds, that melts like anything, it just falls off in a week or 10 days. So the best for seborrheic keratosis is cryotherapy compared to any other. Though we can use carbon dioxide laser, we can use radio frequency reasonably well, but cryo is the best. Pyogenic granuloma also, most of the time I try to excise it. If it is small, punch excise it and close it. Or because when you try to do pyogenic granuloma with electrocautery, it will be difficult because it continues to bleed, it interferes, and it will become tedious, it will become messy. We also try injecting sclerosant in some cases. So now we have localized to either excision or sclerosant.
Right.
I also do something called focused cryotherapy. What I do is I take these punches which are available in different sizes, cut it, typically place it, press it around, freeze it deeply. When you are freezing it, this punch also gets embedded into that and it stands vertical because it is frozen for nearly 5 minutes and it falls off. It works wonderfully because the idea here is to freeze it deep and freeze it completely. I do it around 3 to 4 freeze thaw cycles and it gives wonderful results because there won't be scarring, and it's very good technique.
So one thing that I follow among all this is that I give a lot of eye drops to apply locally, like ciprofloxacin and all kind of eye drops, because in dermatology you only get clindamycin drops, which I find may not be effective, and it's an anti-acne thing, so they don't really like it because it's an anti-acne thing. So I use ciprofloxacin eye drops and things like that, which are safe and very soft. You can apply it on the scalp. I normally don't dress it because it is difficult to dress it, and so that is all about it. Excision.
Actually, the eye drops, the concentration of the medication is much less.
But
eye and skin.
Ciprofloxacin is the same like clindamycin 1%. So if you see the efficacy, I think that has a point. Excision we have all done, and we do excision and suturing and hemostasis and all, we know about this, especially for nevus sebaceous. You have to go really deep and you have to excise the whole thing together, and it is sometimes it might bleed, so you have to do hemostasis because it's deep on the scalp anyway, it bleeds. How do you control bleeding? I mean, is there anything that you do other than electrosurgeries or bipolar cauteries, anything that
actually if you inject the xylocaine with adrenaline deeper into the scalp and a good quantity, elevate it, or even you can give tumescent also if you have that fear, to make it less vascular, and also that helps you. Second thing is that I wanted to add, usually other than that nothing is required unless you are really doing a very large area where electrocautery can be, bipolar cautery can be of use in some cases. Otherwise we can always control it with suturing, and if you have a difficulty you can always use your scissor or this thing, back of the ring of the scissor and all, for compressing, and meantime when you are suturing it. That is one technique. And in nevus sebaceous, if it is little larger, a big block, and if you think that excising in a single sitting will be difficult to suture, you can go for serial partial excision. Similarly, I have done lot of cases of this giant melanocytic nevi in the temporal areas extending into the scalp. So serial partial excision is one good technique to remove larger lesions serially, and finally you will achieve very good results.
Right. I think this is a very important advice, guys, where you have to see that you can do serial excisions, you can do the surgery, but actually promise, like we do, our laser sessions, that I will remove your hair in 8 sessions. You can say that I can remove your mole in 6 to 8 sessions, comes every month. and you can excise it and you can have very good results.
No, only 2 or 3 sittings would be enough at a day.
It depends on the size. As I said, you can require multiple sessions. So it is not wrong if you are advising multiple sessions, because we are anyway doing it for laser hair removal and so many other, procedures like peels. Vitiligo treatment, what interventions are we doing? Excimer laser, how many of us do? And does anybody does grafting on scalp? What is the thing? Excimer laser, does anybody?
Yeah, excimer, in some cases we use the comb, the targeted phototherapy comb,
Right.
use in conditions where they are really worried and they want to pigment the patches also, in addition to targeting other areas if it is there combined with other areas and scalp. Grafting, no, it's very difficult because to find a suitable donor area to match the scalp, you will have to take it from the scalp. So difficult,
Asim, do you do excimer for the scalp lesions?
No, sir.
Targeted phototherapy.
So I do excimer laser for scalp phototherapy for especially for children. See, the problem with children is that you can't expose to generalized phototherapy, and the parents are very worried that, especially in high profile patients where they don't want even a single patch of vitiligo on the scalp or body and things like that. Vitiligo is one big paranoia. So you will have to do something in terms of, and it gives decently good results. I think, you do excimer, just shave the hair to about 1 to 2 millimeters, then it becomes like a normal skin. So the vitiligo patch has to be shaved so that the hair doesn't act as a blocking part. And then you have to give the excimer laser, focus your actually targeted phototherapy machine with the excimer laser, and just
do they experience pinpoint pain at the sides of hair? Because usually what happens, I've seen that, that hair absorbs more this thing and it causes little pain.
If you shave the hair, I think I have not seen that. I've been doing routinely. Just shave the hair so that the heat is not absorbed into the hair, and bring it to 1 millimeter thickness, and then do it. And then ask the patient to shave every week, or you can shave it in your clinic. Just take a razor and just do it so that, and generally about 10 to 12 sessions, you get very good result. We actually follow it about, 2 times a week. Grafting is actually difficult. As he said, now hair growth interventions, I think we are coming to Aman.
One last point.
Yeah.
QE can be done for vitiligo scalp.
Yes.
I mean, you could do that.
UVB, I think the targeted or, UVB, either in terms of excimer as a targeted UVB or general UVB as well. Yes, I agree.
No. What she said is FUU can be done. That is
FUE can be done. Oh, I didn't hear.
That's very, very good. I forgot to say it's one of the it is proven and effective method.
Yes, very true.
Area to do hair transplant.
Yes, the hair can act as
Almost like an alternative to punch grafting of what you are doing other places, and it gives better results.
right. That's I think very valid point. FUE is a very good treatment where you can, along with the hair, you can transport melanocytes with the hair follicle, which migrates in the surrounding area and can give very good results. I think that's a very valid and very important point. Hair growth interventions, I think she has covered. LLLT, how many of us do it, and do they do in all the patients? Do you give home care devices or call the patients? How does it follow? Asim?
I usually give a home care device. We have these helmets from Capillus, which we give patients. I find it very good for a DUPA pattern of hair loss, diffuse unpatterned, because of the area involved. There's almost 700 to 800 centimeter square area involved. None of the other interventions would make sense financially, or you can't. None of the other things make sense. That is one area where I find LLLT. I'm not finding very, very good results because DUPA patients are so androgenic that unless you control their DHT levels in the scalp with something orally, you won't really get anywhere. But as a sub therapy, I find LLLT quite good in this subset of patients.
Raghu, anything to add?
I am a bit radical fellow. I don't do many things which I am not convinced with the results. That is why I have become more of a surgeon than a aesthetician.
Right. So his vote is no for LLLT. Aman, I have seen in your videos, you have this big LLLT device which looks different and you call the patient to the clinic, you follow it up after a PRP.
Yes, sir.
Do you call for every LLLT, you call the patient to the clinic, or how do you do it?
So we have a very good hooded device. It has many hundreds of diodes, and
What is it called?
Sir, I'll send the name. Suddenly it is like I'll do that. It is something. It is number one. You have to make sure it is a diode, not an LED. Number two, we have combined it with PRP. So we have named it hair gain therapy. So what do we do is that we do PRP, then laser every week, and then again PRP, and then laser every week. So it is a 36-minute sitting that the patient comes to the clinic once a week. And so laser means once a week. So it is a total 3-month plan that we draw out for the patients. And we call it the whole treatment as hair gain therapy in our clinic. So it's a combination of PRP with low-level laser therapy. We are now conducting a study, also a retrospective study, in which we only did PRP and in where we combined PRP with low-level laser therapy and how are the results. So we are compiling the data and seeing how much it affected. Because in every case, we also do trichoscopy right before the PRP, because after PRP, it becomes difficult because it's wet hair, so you can't see. So we see the hair shaft diameter, we see densities. So those parameters we note, and also the subjective assessment of the patient, how he or she feels the hair looks like. Also, we have brought up something like hair max therapy in our clinic, in which we add mesotherapy after those 3 months of this PRP with low-level laser therapy, they go for mesotherapy. So something in continuation that goes on. But even in mesotherapy, we have combined the patient first comes and undergoes low-level laser therapy, and then we electroporate the meso solution, but after microneedling. So, I mean,
Dr. Aman, what do you use for mesotherapy?
Sorry, sir?
What agents do you use for mesotherapy?
So, sir, mesotherapy, we use meso cocktails. Earlier, we used we got the solutions from a company in Barcelona, Spain. So they were sending us ginkgo bilobas and hair cocktails and, ginseng, hair growth factors. Even they call them stem cell factors, but obviously we know that there are no stem cells like that, but
Stem cell
few growth
stimulators.
factors. I've been asking for finasteride, mesofinasteride, but still I haven't gotten the hold over mesofinasteride as yet. But we are doing quite a bit of alone also meso, and a combination with low-level laser therapy also.
Richa, do you do it at the clinic? You call the patient like Aman, or you actually give it to the patient to buy the cup?
No, I'm not doing LLLT at all. So
You are like Raghu. You don't believe in LLLT too much. So
not so much, but yeah, I think I should.
What I wanted to say is, unless I am totally convinced that it works, and if it is going to cost or if it is going to make the patient come multiple sittings, because we have so many other methods. Even Dr. Aman now said she combines with so many things. So you can use other combinations as well.
So this is a slide which shows what is the mechanism of action of LLLT, and that is why US FDA has approved it. So it has an anti-inflammatory action. It stimulates microcirculation. It also stimulates localized lymphocytes and increased production of ATP in the mitochondria, leading to increased hair growth. This is why it is actually approved. They have approved it, and this is one of my patient with a combination of LLLT and PRP. So this is one of my patients.
Dr. Sachin, you agree with me that even if you do PRP, you get these results?
I agree. But the problem is that unlike you make a lot of money by other procedures, we have to do
No, I'm not a money man.
What I'm trying to say is that sometimes you have to combine. You see, the problem is the patient always wants more, and if it's
I agree. See, I am not saying anything. As Dr. Aman said, as I said, when you are doing a focused practice, you tend to do a lot of things. You get innovations, and you find the advantages, disadvantages. So if you find an advantage combining LLLT with other things, welcome. But Dr. Aman, now do you think that the patient will agree to come every week for 3 weeks for this in the working patient?
So, yeah, that's where the only PRP.
Yes.
PRP we usually do once in a month. That is easy to convince. But when you want to call a patient every week for 3 weeks for LLT, how difficult or how easy you find to convince the patient?
Sir, I will tell you what Aman probably does and what we also do. If you give packages, then they will come, because it's a part of the package. If they don't come, they lose it. So it is a part of the package, and that is the reason you come. If you charge every week the 2,000 rupees or 1,000 rupees, they would not come to do only LLLT. Maybe
How easy it is to say that, you know, he could not come, that you have lost the money. I don't think it is easy.
No, I'm not saying that. Aman, you will answer her better.
Sir, also I tell you another thing. PRP is everywhere, right? Like it's
Yes,
the
yes.
2,000 rupee PRP everywhere. It's the 1,200 rupee PRP everywhere. What different are you giving? What I will also share my PRP regime.
Yeah, I
what I'm
agree with
doing.
you.
You know, when you're giving something additional, patient बोलता है वो PRP तो मैंने वहां से पहले भी 6 session ले लिया, 8 कर लिया. So what am I giving as a, you know, a specialized center? So when you convince them like that okay, I have this hood, it is supposed to reduce inflammation, give some volume to your hair. So they invariably, most of them who can come, that means suburbs within till 100 kilometers of range of my center, whether it Ludhiana, Delhi or Bangalore, they agree to that. But then yes, you're right, where patients cannot come every week or every 10 days. That is where home care devices along with PRP I give.
Asim, where is Asim vanished?
Right here, right here.
Asim, so what do you do? I mean, do you combine PRP with LLLT or do you just give LLLT normally? Because as a monotherapy, I have not found LLLT effective. That, you know, just giving topicals and just give the cap, I don't find that it is to be very effective, though it is US FDA approved. What is your view on that?
So like I said, I only give LLLT to patients who have DUPA, who have diffuse unpatterned alopecia, where I know I'll have to give them 10 to 12 ml of PRP if I'm going to give them good PRP, which is not feasible. So that is the only subset of patients where I give it to them. And we get these imported from, I think, Italy, Capitalist machines. So we give them the link of the vendor and they buy it directly from the vendor.
Right.
If I ask me a combination which gives the maximum result and can be easily done is microneedling with PRP. The reason is, even for PRP anyway you are giving sometimes scalp black if you are doing a regular PRP, and it is easy to do microneedling also. It compounds the effects because basically they work in the same principle, so the effect will be very much more compounded. So most of the time we are not doing microneedling now once the PRP has become viral.
Right.
So you can give home-based microneedling. We normally tell the patients to use 1 mm or a 0.5 mm derma roller, self-use derma rollers at home, which they can use like once a week or even, you know, twice a week.
I am not a proponent of many of these home treatment, particularly invasive things, because they will not use themselves. They will give to entire relatives, entire friends, and they will become doctors. They will start open a trichology clinic.
They will do live sessions on Instagram.
Trust me, in India, if you just give to one patient, he will give it to 100 people. He will tell, I will manage your hair loss, you come.
Interestingly, sir, not related to this thing, I was invited by one of these influencers from Mumbai. She wanted to do a live microneedling session where she would be doing microneedling and I had to guide her through the process if she was correct or not. Luckily, I refused, fortunately. But this is the kind of thing that people will do at home.
Definitely. Once you just ask them to do anything and they will, see, I'll tell you, once you give a paracetamol for headache, now, most of the patients, they will only treat, you know, they will guide. My mother will give, she is a totally illiterate and she has never gone to school also in a village, and she is almost like a doctor because we give her some treatment, she will give it to all relatives.
So in terms of PRP, anybody would like to contribute anything? I think we have discussed it. Aman, you wanted to say that how do you do it differently? All PRPs are not same.
So we don't. Yes, sir. We don't use any kit, number one. We are using an open system. Yeah. And since 2013, we are doing PRPs, and we use, we have changed the router, the inner router of the machine. We have changed of the Remy's cold centrifuge, and we're using 40 to 60 ml of the blood we are taking from every patient. We are not doing 10 ml because we want a good concentrate of PRP. So if I'm doing half a head, I would do like 40 ml. And if I'm doing the whole head, I would do possibly 60 ml. And each of my routers, one, you know, the tube, even my tubes are specially designed. They are glass test tubes, not test tubes, the glass tubes. And Dr. Anil Garg and me did that. And he has really come up with the innovations of how that first spin tube should be. It is different. The first spin tube is different. The second tube spin tube is different. So it's easy for us to take off that, you know, the buffy layer and how to extract it nicely. And it's an open system, but I am injecting, suppose for the whole scalp, I'm injecting somewhere like 6 to 7 ml of PRP. So I'm not doing less. So, and we always do microneedling before I inject my PRP. So, I mean, we are trying to do as much, and I take blood with 18 gauge needle. So, and we are using calcium chloride for activation, although there are studies which say
My journey with PRP was like this. Usually, initially we were doing with the regular tubes, but then the pain is a big problem. It is really painfully. The pain is one hindrance. Second thing, then I started using ready-made kits, which was easy but little more expensive. And then the cost of some of these companies started coming down, so we could afford and we could do that. But now what I have found is really good results with GFC. And it is giving much better results than PRP and much less painful. So for the past 6 months, with our own evaluation, study and observation, GFC is giving much more better results than PRP, and the quantity you get is more, because you are taking the entire serum, which is where you have growth factors liberated, and the cost of the tubes is very less and affordable. So this is my personal observation, and the results are much superior.
So
that's
does
what-
anybody, yes, please, Richa, please go ahead.
So with GFC, the good part is that they supinate that the extract that you're getting is basically acellular, and all the platelets have actually emptied all their growth factors into that. So it's no longer a question of even the platelet count. So now we have the solution which is rich in the growth factors just as a solution. So you needn't bother about the platelet count also. So I think that is the future now.
Right.
And the quantity you get covers the entire scalp where we need to do it. Second, the pain is very minimal and the cost is also very less.
So, but GFC, they charge 2,000 rupees or something per kit.
2,500, 2,000.
2500.
See,
It's not
it will come almost to 1,300, 1,500 when you are buying in bulk.
Okay.
And suppose, it's easy to do and the less tedious. So that reduces your burden of all that, and you can charge little. See, basically it is like this, you're doing once in a month, and if the results are good, you need to do. See, I'll tell you, PRP, what I was getting in 6 sittings, I'm getting in 3 to 4 sittings in GFC.
Right.
Unfortunately, that reduces the cost also.
Asim, do you do an HIV, HBsAg? Because I have spoken to Anuj Pal and few other dermatologists in Delhi, and they routinely ask for HIV.
No, sir,
HCV.
never. I've never gotten it done for this, only pre-transplant, but never for PRP.
No, I don't think it is required
All right.
because it is his own blood.
Yes.
Right. No, but you are coming in contact with the
For
blood
us, sir, I
products
think
and
for
all
us.
that.
Why should we come in contact?
Also for medical legal purposes, they do advise that tomorrow the patient shouldn't come with a positive HCV and try to sue you, but I don't do it regularly.
Okay, what about mesotherapy? How do you do it? What is the legal protection? Because I do a lot of mesotherapy as well. I do a lot of them, and so
I was initially, Venkat was always talking against, and he was literally going paranoid about mesotherapy. So I had to moderate one session in Dharmakon, Mangalore. So I had to read, and as a dermatologist, when you read, you get discouraged.
But now there are a lot of papers from from Taiwan and other
If you
places.
don't
where there
read,
are a
you
lot
can
of
do
studies.
it. But if you read, you get discouraged.
Right.
Lot of a lot of scientific data against it. But if you have one specific material which you think is helping or giving you results, it is up to you based on your experience.
Asim, you would like to add something?
You should. One thing is, you should know what it is. You should know the quality and the sterility part of it, and you should know the specific reason for which you are using. But if you just use a mixture of concoctions without much precise knowledge about what it is, for what we are doing and how it works, then that is where it has lost its
Credibility.
role.
Yes. Asim, you would like to say something?
Same thing, sir. I don't find too much of usage in androgenetic alopecia. I do give it for patients who come with a lot of hair fall and patients with telogen effluvium. But again, there I never injected, sir. I had this discussion once with, I used to use Geosmatic. I use the brand, obviously. So I had a discussion with their director once about their, the feasibility of injections, because I see a lot of people inject mesotherapy solutions. Mesotherapy solutions worldwide are accepted only as a cosmeceutical, only to be applied on the skin. So I either use an electroporation machine from the hydrofacial machine, or I do microneedling, and then I just spread the mesotherapy solution over that. But I really don't think much is happening, because like Raghu sir mentioned, microneedling itself works wonders in my practice. So I don't feel mesotherapy is contributing too much extra.
And most of the packs do say this is not for injection.
Yes.
It is on top.
There is no
This-
legal binding for us to inject, is what I feel.
Right. Microneedling, I think we have discussed. I use Derma pen, but some people use Derma rollers. Is there any difference in the results, Dr. Raghu, Dr. Aman, and any
See, Derma pen to use for the entire scalp area, the cost wise also will increase, and maybe it is more precise, more deeper, and more controlled. But for scalp, you can as well use Derma roller itself.
See, the reason I use Derma pen is because you see one needle of Derma pen can last you for 3 or 4 sessions. You can actually give it to the patient, and they say that the scalp root or the mesenchymal cells are at 2 levels, at about 5 millimeter dim, at about 0.8, 0.9 millimeters. So you can actually change the
That
variation.
Derma pen fellow can influence you like anything. That, once you sit in front of him, my God, he will not leave you. He will convince you.
Yes. So, but again, yes. So I think there are proponents, but I think microneedling as a whole, it helps. We all agree with that.
Yeah.
It's a good stimulant for hair growth, and some people apply solutions after Derma pen to increase the penetration of the solutions. So anybody applies any adjuvants after microneedling? Asim, do you apply anything after doing microneedling?
Like I said, sir, any growth peptide which I lay my hands on, I apply it, but I don't promise anything to the patient. I'm not mentioning that I'm doing a mesotherapy as such.
Right.
I've ventured so far as crushing a dutasteride tablet, mixing it with minoxidil, and putting it on top of the after the microneedling. I've not published anything, so I can't say, but it seemed very attractive as an option.
Actually, a lot of our friends from abroad have dutasteride available as a mesotherapy solution. So that is something which we've been trying to get here. I got a couple of vials when we had gone for a conference, but that's something which we should look forward to. If dutasteride comes as a mesotherapy solution in India, I think that will be a very, very good thing for us to use.
Right. How many have practiced Regenera? I think this geosmetic guy is after has to take punch biopsy.
Yeah, I had an experience. I took it and then I tried in around 40 patients. I'm not happy with the cost and the result proportionately, so I discarded it and I moved to GFC and very, very happy.
Right.
It's not proportionately useful.
I think Somen will not be happy with
Or someone will convince you like anything. It's difficult to sit in front of him and to deny.
Right. So, but I think this is important that Regenera is a new stem cell therapy, and they try to show you research that it works. It is something that you have to decide about on your own experience. It's a new therapy which can be tried in people who want to do it and want to offer something more. The only problem, my problem with this therapy is the cost of the kit. If that was in the range of 5,000-7,000, it would have been probably a better thing. That coming to 30,000, 25,000 is something which is, I think, a steal to the patient to actually, get.
Problem, Sachin, any expensive procedure you are doing, if you are sure of the results, then you can defend it.
Yes.
When you are not sure of the results and if it is expensive, it is not worth, because we are answerable to the patient. We lose more patients and their families.
Right. Aman, you are saying something, yes.
I've seen a lot of doctors who have Regenera also give complimentary PRPs as a package, like 1 Regenera and 3 PRPs.
Because you know the reality.
Yeah, that's what works.
What about carboxytherapy? Now, Spectra, the Ram guy of Chennai, they have carboxytherapy for hair, and they inject medical grade carbon dioxide inside the hair to generate. Anybody doing it or have heard of it or do it?
Heard of it, never done it. I've heard of it more in the periorbital area.
Yeah. So what they do is they inject medical grade, and they inject about 20-minute procedure, and you inject about 30 to 50 ml on the entire scalp, and you have to do multiple sessions, again, one every week, for about 1 to 2 weeks, for about 10 to 12 sessions. It is very common abroad, mind you, and it is very successful. They say how it helps is that it causes hypoxia, which causes increased release of oxygen in the local area. The local hemoglobin, so the oxygen concentration increases, leading to angiogenesis and fibroblast proliferation and hair growth. Hypoxia actually increases the O2 concentration indirectly. It asks all the RBCs to release the local oxygen there. The only side effect is you should see and you should take care that you are not in the blood vessel, otherwise you will cause air embolism. So when you are injecting at multiple sites, you must see that before injecting, you can withdraw it with and see that you are not inside a blood vessel. Otherwise, but especially in Europe, I have attended even a workshop in EADV where I have learned carboxytherapy, and it's a very common procedure there. The problem with India is that finding a CO2 cylinder every time calling him to have a CO2 cylinder is actually difficult. So the logistics makes it difficult, but the results that you see on the literature is very promising. What about newer therapies like threads? Anybody practices threads on the hair? Aman?
Nightmare.
I do for face,
yes.
but I've never done for
Scalp, it's really not.
Yes, so I actually attended a workshop in Thailand way back, and what they did was something like this. So what they did is, in the area where the hair is not growing despite anything, this is an area which is not being, even with hair transplants, you find this area, we do hair transplants in our clinic and we see this area very difficult to get back the hair. In these areas, they inject multiple threads, and how they say it works is that it stimulates the collagen elastin production, promotes new blood vessel formation, activates fibroblast, and thus stimulating hair growth. So it can be done in areas which are resistant.
And what is the guarantee that it will give?
There is no guarantee. You see, hair transplant also, there is no guarantee, but it can be an add-on treatment, especially for people like Aman, who actually does hair transplants in area where the graft is difficult to take up. In those areas, they say to do it and repeat after 3 months. And if you see the literature, they say that there is a moderate to good response after 2 sessions. So this is something for the audience. If you are doing hair transplant and hair practice, you can do, and it's very simple to do. We all know that. Just put the thread and pull it out.
ये mono threads लग रहे हैं ना sir? More like not
no, just mono threads.
Not cog threads.
Not cog threads. Just mono threads, PDO threads. Just put it and take it out. So this is from one of the workshops. They just put it and take it out all together, just to, you can do it one and take it out also, but they leave it because they want to see that they have covered all the area. So that they see that they have covered all the angles and they do it, but they have to be repeated after 3 months. So it is something which can be added to practice in case you are wanting in resistant areas, something for us to know. Micropigmentation, I don't do it. I think it looks bad after 2-3 months and they come for removal with laser. Hair transplant.
I'll just add one point here. Micropigmentation, if you can do it with, grade 2 or grade 3 Ludwig's androgen attic alopecia, to just give that feel during some occasions or wedding for some time is okay. But I have seen completely bald man getting it done and look like a joker.
Yes. That is a problem.
I do SMD.
I told this fellow, is son of my very close uncle is in US. I tried to convince him from hair transplantation, even from beard and body sides. He did not agree. I told him, if not, don't go for micropigmentation. Rather, you make this itself as a style. He did not, and he went and did micropigmentation. Now he is repenting and he wants to remove it. It looks so bad, I'm telling you.
Yes.
It looks so artificial.
We are
Complete bald head.
To Aman now for hair transplantation. I think she is going to talk about hair transplants. I think she does maximum. So Aman, how many sessions do you require for hair transplant? 1 or many, or how do you determine, and how much result do you promise?
Sir, it's addictive. So, I mean, as many. I mean, we see in the first go, we only promise a scalp cover. So as much as we can do, because we cannot give a natural density, we give a cosmetic density. So it depends like how much we can do in one, how much is the recipient area versus how much is the donor reserve. So we have to, assess the area. And even if the patient wants, gag, like grossly overdoing the density part, they say kahin se bhi le lo, jitna marzi ho sake, thicker laga do. But still, I mean, there is a limit as to how much we can do. So most of the times patients come back for a touch-up. So it is possibly
you are also
it depends on multiple factors, Sachin.
Yeah.
Asim?
Sachin, it depends on multiple factors.
Right.
It depends on multiple factors.
Sir, very limited areas. We do beard on our own because Madhulika and I both are trained, but we usually call in another dermatologist, Dr. Amit Kerure, to do our transplants when we have more than 1,000 grafts to be put.
Right. So I think we can get great results. And now what is in trend is other from scalp. The only problem that I suggest my patients with hair transplant is that
some audience is telling you wrap up before all the audiences are logged out.
So last thing I want to share is the name of the machine that I have, the low-level laser therapy that you wanted. I have Sani from Sani.
What did you say?
I said I had promised to tell you the name of the low-level laser therapy
Yeah.
hooded device
Yeah.
that I have. It is Sane Beauty, and it is from China. So the
Okay.
cost is somewhere around 3,200 USD that it is for.
Okay.
Somewhere.
So this is the last slide, guys, and thank you so much. I would, for the people, I think in small time of 2 years, thanks to Raghu, we are now a recognized center at SkinVita for 4, AXI fellowships, IADBL observerships, as well as 5 IADBL observerships and 2 training courses. It's one of the only centers which offers 2 training courses. So we do all kinds of dermatology and aesthetic treatments. And if you want to join, please come and help us with learning. Thank you, all of you. And now I think we'll stop sharing and can come
Yes,
back to me.